What are you doing out here, honey?
Oh, I'm looking for some land to build our cabin on.
Oh,
You want to
cool.
come see?
Yeah. You show me?
Yeah, I'll show you how to do it. Check it out. Maybe you've always dreamed about buying a piece of vacant land and building your dream cabin or house on it. If that sounds like you, then today is a video that you need to tune into because today, Elizabeth and I are going to chat with you about all the different considerations and process involved in finding, securing, contracting on, and closing on your piece of vacant land to build your new home on. I'm Reed Puser,
And I'm Elizabeth Puser.
and we are part of the Roots Home Sales team. And for the last 15 years, we've been helping clients just like you find and locate pieces of vacant land or existing homes here in Colorado. And if this is your first time to the channel, make sure that you click that button to subscribe and click the bell so that you're notified every time we bring out new content.
So Reed, how do you find the right piece of vacant land?
Well, I would say that the first thing you have to do is know what you're looking for. So you kind of need to have your criteria predetermined as you begin your search for vacant land. Some of those things that you want to think about is, what are you going to use that land for? You want to make sure that it's in a location that's good for you. You want to make sure that the zoning complies for the activities that you would like to do. And a lot of different things like that.
That makes complete sense.
Yeah.
So after you find your criteria and you start working through it, what do you do next?
Once you find your criteria, if you want to start doing this on your own, you can do something like we'll show you right here, which is getting onto Zillow and pairing Zillow with this other program called Land ID. That's what I found to be the best way to get yourself a real understanding of not just what the land looks like in photos and where it's located, but also what the topography of it is like, whether there's any wetlands or streams that run through it, which could be a big problem, and all of those kinds of things.
Okay, that sounds great. So once you've got your criteria, once you've started looking at the land for its actual geographic determinations and features, so you've got those things taken care of, what's the next step? How do I actually start looking at land?
Yeah, well, that's a great question as well. And you can do a number of different things, right? One of the easiest things, of course, is to get in contact with a local real estate agent who you know, trust, and is very, up to date with that marketplace. The other thing is you could do this on your own too, right? You could go through a lot of the filtering and screening and searching for land right on an open source website like Zillow. And you could start there and start to really refine your search criteria and get an understanding of what is available out there in the marketplace before you even contact a realtor. All right, so Zillow is a wonderful website for people to use to browse different areas, and you can also browse vacant land on Zillow. So you're going to want to make sure that you select only lots and land in the home type, hit apply on that. And there's a lot of different things about vacant land that you need to assess. We're going to go through all of those in this video today. But one of my favorite tools that I like to use is I like to use the map view of Zillow. And, I like to look at orientation of lots. And as you can see right here, we got north up towards the top of my screen, south down towards the bottom. If you've lived in Colorado for any amount of time, especially in the mountains, you know that it is all about having good sunshine and good orientation. If you are on the northeast facing slope here in this neighborhood, then you actually are going to have tons of snow for a long time, and the snow will hang around probably another 2 months after it's all melted off of here. So I've been specifically looking at some lots that are along this Mountain View Drive right here, as you can see. And what I like to do to confirm what the topography looks like is I like to switch back and forth from the Zillow display over to what's called Land ID. This is another open source platform that you can subscribe to. And as you can see here, one of my options is to have it as modern topography map, right? So that's the layer I have on right here. And one of the ways that I know that this is a place that has good sunlight as well as a good orientation is you can see that our topo map is showing that this is a ridge, and that's delineated by this kind of curvature right here in the topo lines all the way down here. So that has great sunshine from the southwest, and just another really cool tool that you can use to get a sense of what the topography of the land is without even visiting. All right, so we're back on Zillow now, and as I'd already mentioned, I'm really not interested in these lots that are northeast facing and in the shade the entire day. So I'm looking specifically at this lot right here, listed for 145K, and I'm going to click on it, and that's great. You can see some photos, that kind of thing right there, which is really nice. But what I want to see is, I can't tell exactly what the topography of this place is, and I also don't see really the lot boundaries that well until I zoom in here. So you can do that here, and then what I like to do is, if you want to, save a couple different lots that you're interested in, you can subscribe to Land ID, and then you can actually go and locate that same lot, and you can select it, and that would allow you to draw a border around it and save it. So now the tricky part is to be able to find it and reference back and forth. So we already talked about how we wanted to designate and target land that has good sun orientation and not northeast facing like these ones right here. So really the only game in town right now on Zillow is this property right here for 145. You can see, if I zoom in far enough on Zillow, I can see the lot shape and everything like that. When I'm searching for multiple lots at the same time, I like to use this program called Land ID to save those lots and in a custom map, and then that way I can go back to those anytime I want when I'm considering things like, okay, where do I want to put the housing envelope, where do I want to put the well, where do I want to put the septic. So if you're on Land ID, you can actually select that same parcel as you saw here on Zillow, and we can save the boundary. So we're going to save the boundary here. That's going to designate that. It's really cool. You can actually save this map. You can share it out to people, and it's a live link. It's hosted on their site with their servers. So it's a really helpful tool to be able to identify and monitor multiple different lots as you're considering all these different aspects that it takes to develop a lot and build your dream cabin on it. So Elizabeth, you've got a lot of experience in the mortgage world. What are people's options in terms of financing these vacant land purchases?
That's a great question. So there's actually two options that are very common. The first one is once you find your parcel, your piece of land, you can go and do a either straight out purchase with it, if you have the cash, or you can do a finance option. A lot of times when you finance a vacant piece of land, you need to find a local bank that's familiar with the area, the values, among a few other things. And then basically you can do about a 30 to 45% down payment and get a financed loan. The second option you have is basically you wrap them all in one. So if you have the plans to be able to basically start construction within 6 months of purchasing the land, you can wrap up the land and the full construction cost all in one loan. So for some people that really are eager, they've got all their plans, kind of their ducks in a row, they know what they're going to be doing, the land and construction wrap up is a great way to go about it. And if you just kind of want to enjoy the land, work your way into it, just buying it outright and financing it is also a great option too.
Cool, thank you so much for answering that.
Yeah.
Next question, where can we find a lender like that?
Well, we of course have some great resources and referrals that we can provide for both types of either just the land or the land and construction loan. So just reaching out to us, talking about kind of what your plans are, what you're thinking about doing, we can help guide you through that for sure. Okay, so maybe let's back up a step. How do we know that this is the right piece of land to be able to put a house on?
Wow, that's such a good question. And maybe, we are getting a little ahead of ourselves if we don't talk about site selection and land selection. That's something that a lot of people kind of take for granted, but no two pieces of land are the same. And so, we mentioned a little bit of this earlier, right? In regards to is there water on the land or what the slope is like. So here's the things that I typically will look at when I'm trying to select a parcel of land to build. So first thing, your must-haves, right? If you must have a big mountain view, then you want to be looking at land with those views. If you must have county maintained road access, then we definitely need to be looking at those kind of places. But in general, we look at a couple different things. So we talked about topography already. You don't want to try to build on a slope like this necessarily, because it's going to cost you a lot more to do so. You may have to bring in a bunch of backfill to be able to get the site prepped so that you can actually pour the foundation. At the same time, you don't want to build a house or select a site where there's like a bunch of springtime runoff, which happens oftentimes in the mountains. You'll see seasonal streams that come about in the springtime and they go away in the fall and the winter. So those are some things as well. Other things, access, I talked about county maintained or city maintained roads. That's great. Other places don't have that, and you're responsible for your own maintenance of the road. Another thing would be the ability to get water there. So we're looking at, well depths of some of the surrounding areas. Finding out from local persons as far as like, is it tough to get a well there or is it easy to get a well there? Another thing that has a big deal is placement of your septic. So you have to actually go through a septic engineering, which I'll talk about here shortly. So there's a myriad of factors that all paint a picture of a lot that's either easy to develop or hard to develop. And you want to make sure that you're having some counsel with somebody you trust who is an expert in this field so that you don't end up purchasing the wrong piece of land.
That's great information and a really good thing to keep in mind while we look for different parts of property across the state. So something to consider when purchasing land, especially if you're in the mountains, it may not be connected to city utilities. So you may not have the traditional water that you would get or the way that the wastewater leaves the house, things like that. So what are we looking at that in that regard?
Yeah, so typically you're right. There's a lot of properties out there that are not connected to city utilities. So in that case, we need to think of two different types of water. One would be our wastewater and one would be our freshwater. Okay. In regards to the freshwater, you would end up applying for a well permit with the Colorado Division of Water Resources. And you would hire a contractor to install that well and drill that well for you. Keep in mind with wells, typically there's very few well drillers in each individual place, and you do need a lot of lead time to give them to get that thing done. So you want to think about seasonality and putting that request in early.
Sounds good.
In regards to wastewater, you're going to be using a septic system, and this is a system to dispose of your wastewater. It usually includes what's called a leach field, which is after the mass has left your tank and the water filtrates into what's called a leach field, and it leaches back into the soil once it's been cleaned.
That's great. That's good information. I might need some more details later. So just keep going.
How about I ask you, do you want me to ask you about driveway and site excavation?
Sure.
So we can go back and forth. So Elizabeth, as we've discussed and as people can tell by now, there's a lot of layers and steps along the way to develop and build your mountain cabin, your house, right? So we talked about access. Can you talk to us a little bit about what it takes to get a driveway in and any considerations we might want to be thinking about?
Absolutely. So when we think about driveways, we think about what's called site preparation. So you have a raw piece of land with all of its natural rocks and trees and grasses, but how do you start using it? So what you can do is you can engage with a professional excavator, and what they'll do is they'll come in, they'll look at the grade, which is the pitch or the degree of slant on the lot. They'll look at what the lot's made out of. Do you have granite underneath? Do you have, softer soils, things like that? They're going to be able to evaluate the entire piece of property at each one, kind of help you probably figure out where you'd want to put a house, where it would face and where it would sit well in the lot, but also get the driveway in. Once the driveway's in, or at least roughly cut in, then you start prepping what is called the building envelope. That's where the house was actually going to sit. And so there can be a lot of things that go into this depending on the type of lot. We talked about the slope, the grade, all of these things. Is it more flat? Are there trees? All of these pieces, and that is what an expert excavator and site prep will be able to do for you. So you cut it in, you start building. If it's on a steep lot, he had mentioned you're gonna have to bring dirt in. That can become expensive. So if you do have to bring dirt in, that can become expensive. You'd be surprised how expensive a truckload of dirt is. And it also takes more time, because if you do have to bring that in and you do have to level the site and recreate it, that may actually have to sit and settle on its own for up to 8 weeks, which can also delay the building envelope and the time that you're given in the mountains. So there's different things to consider, but reaching out to an expert in this, which is going to be a land development, land excavator, and just really leaning into them, which of course we can give referrals, is probably going to be the best way to start on this side. When we talked about where our water comes and goes from, the other thing to consider is what about power? What about natural gas or things like that? Because when you're connected here in the city, you don't really have to think too much about that. But when you're in a mountain area, where does it come from?
Yeah. So, it's amazing how many things we kind of don't think about when we move into an existing home and it's already connected and everything. But in terms of developing a piece of land, sometimes you'll find neighborhoods that have natural gas already in the roads. And in those scenarios, you'll have to pay what's called a tap fee to be able to join up to them. And that fee can be anywhere from like $15,000 to $30,000 is what I've usually seen. If you are not in a place where there's natural gas lines, you're going to be using LP or liquid propane. That means you're going to have a propane tank, a freestanding propane tank set out away from your house a ways. Those usually come in 500 gallons or 1,000 gallons, and that's what can run a lot of your major systems. Of course, your gas stove, your furnace or your boiler, all of those kinds of things. The other thing that you have to account for is connecting with electricity. So as you're reviewing lots, you want to make sure that there's electricity nearby.
Yes.
If there's not electricity nearby, it means that you would need to run the electricity to the closest location that it currently exists. That can be very expensive. You can run electric either above ground on the lines, or you can excavate and run it underneath the ground. Obviously, excavating is a lot more expensive, but one of the definite rules of lot buying is that you must have electricity close by.
So a little bit earlier, I talked about the driveways, excavation, and site prep. So once the site is prepped, what do you do then?
So once your site is prepped, the fun part begins, because you actually get to see the place come out of the ground and you get to see the progress, and that's a lot more fun than just doing all the planning. So the first thing that you're going to do is do your foundation system, right? So you're going to have hired your GC, and they're going to have a subcontractor, or they may do this themselves depending, and they're going to go ahead and put in your foundation system, including your stem walls, your slab if you're going to build slab on grade, or your engineered floor system.
Okay, cool. So Reed, I can tell that there's a pretty good sequence of all of this, So we started with just the flat land, we got the driveway in, we got the site prepped, we've got the foundation. What's the next step in this?
Next step after foundation, once that's all cured up and you're done with your foundation inspection, you get to go ahead and start framing. So this is going to be, either your timber product, or some people are building with structural steel, and you're going to attach that directly to that foundation system, and your walls are going to start to come up. So framing, and then after framing, you're going to be looking at sheathing, which is like the OSB board on the exterior of your walls, which helps with the lateral shear. Once you have those two things done, you're basically done with all your timber framing, and you're looking to start the next step of the phase.
That's awesome. We're getting there.
Yeah. So Elizabeth, we've got the exterior taken care of. We're officially dried in, which is great. What is the first step on the interior finish out of this house?
Yes, so being dried in, first of all, is super exciting, because now it means that the weather elements don't affect what's going to happen in the build. So now that we're working on the inside, we're going to start with plumbing. All of the plumbing lines are going to be run based off of all the plans, and they're going to start to come into all of the places. So pipes are going to be run through the wall. They're going to stop right there at the wall where you would technically see, the drywall eventually. So this is what we call rough plumbing. All of this is rough because it's behind the walls. So after we get the rough plumbing in, we'll have the inspector come in, make sure it looks good, and then we'll move on to the rough electrical. This is where you run all of the electrical lines. Again, this is on the inside of the walls that you don't ever see. So it'll come out to where any outlet is, where any light fixture is, all of those pieces. We're not ready to connect any of the sockets or any of the other finished pieces just yet on that. So once those two things are in, they're approved, they've gotten their inspection checkoffs, we get to move on to the next phase. So while we're in the rough phase, one of the other things to consider is basically how are you going to heat, cool the house, and provide hot water? So Reed, what do we know?
So heating and cooling, typically we hear that referred to as HVAC. heating, ventilation, air conditioning. So that is going to be one of the next steps, is determining what kind of heating system we're going to use, somewhat based on preference and also based on the fuel we have available. And oftentimes there's going to be a forced air heating system, for example, and that's the one you're used to, where you have vents in the floor and the hot, warm air pushes out through those vents in a forced manner. There's also options for a hot water boiler, which is like hot water baseboard, meaning there's some registers on the base of the wall where it meets the floor, and they run hot water through those that copper piping, and it provides that radiant